Hello and welcome to Long COVID Physio Podcast. My name is Darren Brown. I'm a physiotherapist and I am living with long COVID. And today we have a very special guest. We have Rob. Hello, Rob. Would you be able to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, yeah, my name's Rob. I live up in Newcastle. I work as a Band 6 physio in MSK across Tyneside. And yeah, so I'm here to chat to you about my experiences with long COVID or COVID, whichever way you want to describe it, and maybe relate that back to some previous experiences with chronic fatigue as well.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today because as we both just said, because we were having a little chat, weren't we? We kind of crossed paths on Twitter because you'd put out a nice little tweet about some experiences and it looks like you're a fell runner, but I don't know what fell running is.
So my mum's side, granny, was from Cumbria. So I've walked in the lake since I was kind of small, Lake District, yeah. And always done some kind of fell walking and walking up and down the mountains and things. And then I think it would have been about 2009. I was actually, because I lived in London for years as well. I was in the lakes with a friend of mine who I hauled him round a few of the peaks, and a fell runner went past and he kind of looked at me and said, "Kind of, wouldn't you want to do that?" And it kind of never really occurred to me. I suppose, yes, it's about 2009. And then I suppose I got into that, about a couple of years later. And when I moved back from London to actually study to retrain as a physio, I joined a local fell running club, Northumberland Fell Runners, and kind of moved into fell running. So yeah, fell running is essentially very kind of non-glamorous. It's all not for profit. Everyone starts in a field. Any profit goes to kind of the local village hall or mountain rescue or the local farmer, and you basically run up and down peaks over bog rock, bog rock, over various checkpoints, which includes navigation at points. So I that's what I do when I'm fit enough to do it. But I also like walking on the fells because it's a bit more serene. You're not hurtling downhill at speeds. But I do other stuff. I do yoga and bit of gym and various things as well. But yeah, I've always been a runner. I come from a road running background. I did a lot of marathons. I did I think about 7 loads of half marathons, and then but then kind of moved into more, I suppose, cross country and fell running. And now I just run for fun. And if I'm fit enough to do things, great. If not, I just sit and have a cup of tea and read a book. I don't force the issue as much as I used to. I used to be kind of mileage and I'm going to do this and these PBs. And, I've got some ideas about what I'd like to do this year and moving forwards, but maybe I'm not quite as obsessive about it. I'm a bit more relaxed. And that's probably because of what we're about to talk about, really. How my perceptions have changed,
So on that note, then, obviously, that I'm presuming living with long COVID. So would you be willing to share your story of your experiences living with long COVID?
Yeah, so I basically have been based. So the service I work in works within Newcastle hospitals and Gateshead hospitals, either side of the River Tyne, but then also kind of community hospital venues. So I did my kind of band 5 rotational stuff in London, amazing experience. But then I decided to go into MSK, and then I suppose when it all blew up in the lockdown, we were moved into the local hospitals to help out on the wards with the kind of just like extra like to keep discharging, like discharge to assess basically, to get people out, because a lot of the physios, they split the 2 hospitals up. So one hospital was non-COVID in theory, one was COVID, the RVI. So basically a lot of the inpatient physios obviously went to the RVI to do respiratory COVID stuff. So they just had less people. So we went there to help out, and it was great. Like, I was back on the wards and I was seeing friends I'd been to university with. I've got, a friend of mine's a nurse specialist in cardiology. I was on his ward. I was like, this is really good fun. And, it's kind of, and then I got COVID. So it must have been about mid-April. I actually went to my friend, the same guy who's a nurse specialist. I went to pick up a bike from him because I thought, it's spring, because the weather was amazing, wasn't it? And I was like, I don't have a bike. Maybe just like just to cycle around the streets would be something different to do. I think I had a toe injury. That's why I couldn't. I was like a minor toe injury, so I'd been doing a bit of running, and then I felt a little bit funny. I felt a little bit off, but nothing major. I cycled home, and then I actually spoke to later. It was like a Friday, so later in the afternoon, I spoke to a friend on the phone, and he said, "Have you got a cough?" And I was like, "Yeah, I have actually." I was like, it was a fairly clear, persistent, dry cough. And I thought, all right, well, I don't feel unwell. And then I kind of went to bed feeling a little bit rough. And then I woke up the next morning and I felt rough. And I was like, I just didn't feel well at all. And I was like, well, if this isn't COVID, then I don't know what is. So I got in touch with Oc Health, and they were great. I mean, like Des, I've been doing we had all the PPE. I mean, I wasn't like intensive care. I was on the kind of standard wards, but I'd been doing everything by the book. There'd be no corners cut as far as I could,
and in a COVID negative hospital by the sounds of it as well.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I know. So I really lucked out there. So, but then, so I suppose I got the test. I was positive. So they said, obviously, you got to isolate. It was like mild to moderate flu. I had a bit of a fever. I didn't feel that great, but I was kind of like, I was a lot of like watching Netflix in bed, but I was able to kind of get up and get food and kind of. And then by the end of the first week, I was kind of like, well, I kind of feel okay. I don't feel too bad. I was going out for short walks, like literally just around the block and stuff. And then I kind of like, I suppose I was kind of picking up a little bit the next week. I was still off work. And again, I remember I was out for a walk with just on my own. I was talking to a friend. He was like, you seem to be doing pretty well. I didn't have any lung issues. I might have had like very mild. Yeah. I mean, I didn't have any obvious breathing issues. No serious respiratory stuff. And then I was kind of saying, like I feel pretty good, to my mate. I've probably walked about 25 minutes. Lovely day, like that amazing weather we had. And then I came home, I went to bed that night, and then I woke up the next morning and I was floored. I got up, my legs felt really weak. I had pins and needles in my legs and my arms, and I was just like, it's not great, really. It doesn't feel like, and I felt really, really wiped out. And I was like, okay, this isn't ideal. I think this was like the Wednesday morning of the second week. And so, or even it was like the second week, I think. It all becomes a bit blurry. But anyway, so I spoke to work, and I think I had a little bit more time off, and then kind of stupidly went back to work. I suppose I'd been off for about 3 weeks, and they were like, well, are you ready to come back? And I was like, well, I suppose you get a little bit kind of, maybe being overly conscientious. So I actually went back to work with kind of COVID symptoms, as in like fatigue and mainly this I guess was a peripheral neuropathy. And like worked for about a month really. And kind of looking back, should never have gone back to work. I don't think because I was necessarily spreading COVID. I just felt terrible.
Your body wasn't.
So what's that?
So it sounds like you might have still had ongoing symptoms 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah. I mean, I had this,
but wanted to respond as part of the COVID responses.
Yeah, kind of. I suppose everyone doesn't like being. I'd never been off for 3 weeks before, So I went back, and actually, in some ways, I was kind of managing. But the when I was sitting, not moving, so sitting still or lying down at night, the like pins and needles. I didn't get any numbness, but the pins and needles was basically almost like the whole of the body. It was really weird. I went to see the GP. She did a full neuro, cleared that because I was thinking, well, is there something else going on? Anyway, so I was back at work for about a month, and then I had a planned week off, like annual leave. I thought, well, that's fine. I'll just rest. And I just totally bombed. Really was not in a good way at all, and was off for like about another 5 weeks. So I was off in total for 8 to 9 weeks, really. And I think the second phase, whereas the peripheral neuropathy continued, the second phase was just this massively debilitating fatigue. I mean, I was completely and utterly done in. I mean, like I said, I didn't have any kind of what you might call vascular issues as far as I was aware. I didn't have any shortness of breath, but like literally going, doing the washing up, just basic ADLs, like, doing the washing up, doing a couple of things. I'd just be knackered, and I'd have to go and lie down for like 20, 25 minutes. And then I'd kind of pick up a little bit. And so basically I had that severe fatigue for about 6-7 weeks, I would say. And then obviously put in a plan of like a return to work, phased return to work, and kind of expected to be pretty wiped out when I got back to work. But but just kind of managed it. But I was off for a good 8 to 9 weeks in total. And actually the peripheral neuropathy lasted for months. And in fact, it went away completely, and it's now come back in a very, very minor, small amount. But it's I don't have any strength issues. I mean, it felt like my legs were weak when it was really bad, but at the moment it's not affecting strength. But it's still there. It's quite a strange feeling, but I don't have any fatigue now. So, you know,
you don't. Would you share what you mean by peripheral neuropathy for anyone that may not understand?
So basically just, I suppose it would be like induced by the virus. And this is, I'm only surmising. No one really knows really, but I know these symptoms are quite common from COVID. Basically like a feeling that all your nerves are kind of trembling, like all through the arms, all through the legs, and actually all the way up the torso when it was at its worst. So actually getting to sleep was a bit of a nightmare. So I had a terrible insomnia as well for a bit. I wasn't very well, basically. I mean, I didn't feel great. I suppose looking back, and this relates to some of the other things, the one thing that actually, it's a double-edged sword, because I have had chronic fatigue, or a version of chronic fatigue in the past, and basically fully recovered, you know, albeit with a few reductions in exercise tolerance now, which I'm working back towards. And so actually, I felt like in some ways I was quite well prepared to deal with something, because I knew I'd recovered from something before. But at the same time, it was like, oh, not again. I felt like I'd been kind of transported back in time. I was like, am I actually back where I started? And actually that emotionally hit me pretty hard for quite a few weeks. I felt really, really low about things. I was just like, I don't know whether I've actually got the energy to overcome something like this, because I was reading about long COVID and the symptoms people were getting. And I thought, well, bloody hell, am I now dealing with something else in this kind of fatigue umbrella? And then actually it was my sister who said, look, you know, I can see why you're feeling like this, but it's a separate entity. I think you have to kind of trust yourself that it's a different, you know, it's a different situation. And of course, like a lot of people who are getting long COVID haven't had chronic fatigue before. So, so I suppose it was a bit of a double-edged sword in that I thought I was, you know, when I was kind of being pragmatic and realistic, once I'd kind of got over the worry and the initial fear and frustration, I probably knew I could get over it over time. But actually, initially, I was just like, oh God, I can't deal with this really. I was just like, and I was like really worried about work. I was like, because you know, when you're doing the washing up and then you have to go and lie down, I was like, how am I actually going to be able to go back to work?
Yeah.
I was like, how can I actually go back to work? I can barely function day to day. And I started to go a bit stir crazy, because I was basically staring at the walls and things. And like I did, and and it was like, it's really nice weather outside. And I was just like,
feel trapped.
I was totally, and I live on my own in a flat in Newcastle. So I was I felt really, I didn't feel alone as in like people had abandoned me or anything. I just felt physically I couldn't do a lot. But obviously I knew I kind of started to put in place methods that I'd used before, that you know, from when I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue. And actually, I mean, I thought at one point that maybe it's because I've had chronic fatigue that I'm like this. But as we know, as I've just said, a lot of people have had COVID who've no previous incidents of any kind of fatigue related issues. So I think once I kind of like settled down and kind of thought, right, okay, I think probably helped talking to my sister and family help. I was just like, right, okay, I need to put in a plan of action of to how to try and manage this from my past experience, which goes back quite a few years.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, isn't it? That you've had a previous experience of, it sounds like, being diagnosed with myalgic encephalomyelitis, or ME, as chronic fatigue syndrome, and then also now having long COVID. I'm now forgetting, how many months have you now been living with the symptoms after COVID-19?
So I had COVID in April.
So what's that now? Is that like 7-8 months, maybe longer?
Yeah, I would say I went to the lakes at the very end of August.
Yeah.
And I'd started to feel, in terms of fatigue, I'd started to feel like a lot better. So I actually went for a walk with my stepsister, and we did it wasn't really a hilly walk. We went for like quite a long walk, and I was like, the sensations were returning. I felt like My legs felt quite strong. I was sleeping better generally. And I was like, right, okay. And then at the end of that week, I actually climbed something. I thought, right, I'm not going to go mad, but I'll try and climb something. And actually climbed like a kind of medium peak and felt pretty good. And I was like, oh, that's pretty good. Like, I'm okay. So that was the end of August. And then I suppose I was picking up again from there and starting to feel pretty normal. And then for whatever reason, the peripheral neuropathy, the pins and needles stuff, which had gone, came back about, I've no idea why, but it came back about 2 months ago.
Really?
On a much lower level.
Yeah.
But it came back for some reason. I think it will go eventually. I'm going to have some acupuncture, actually. I had some success with acupuncture when I had really severe fatigue with COVID, and also previously with chronic fatigue. So there's a guy I know in Newcastle who I'm going to have a couple of sessions just to see if that maybe helps settle the system down, because I think my system was just fried. I mean, I think it was like everything had just been kind of shocked into, by the COVID. So yeah. So we're talking April to August, really. It's the end of August, and then obviously I've still got some lingering symptoms. I still get really bad cramps in the legs.
Do you?
Yeah, and I drink a fair bit of water. I don't ever remember getting them before.
Yeah.
But if I'm doing like yoga, I'll get like sudden really bad cramp in the hamstring or the foot. It's less than it was. I mean, these are minor things. I'm not going to. And actually, my exercise tolerance has returned pretty much to base level. I'm feeling pretty good now.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so I would say I'm fully recovered insofar as the only thing I've got is the kind of slight pins and needles. But like I said to you, I'm only talking about it from a fatigue point of view. I didn't have any respiratory issues. I didn't have any vascular related issues. So I can't talk about recovery in those senses. The kind of other medical issues. I can only talk about fatigue and how I've managed that, really.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to hear your story, and thank you for sharing that, because it sounds, not only is it multidimensional in its nature, there's different types of symptoms and different body symptoms, but it also seems like it's relatively episodic and somewhat unpredictable in its nature, where it felt like things were getting better and then
completely
back, and that can make it really quite difficult to maintain a sense of self and awareness, but also mood. And you referenced that, and how your previous experiences with another condition, MECFS, had impacted you this time in terms of taking you back to that place and feeling like, I can't go through this again, and the implications of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously we're talking about long COVID here. We're not really talking about chronic fatigue, but I was diagnosed with, I had glandular fever in 2009. Well, what they think was glandular fever after a half marathon. And I had a post-viral fatigue for about 5-6 months of the kind of weird, couldn't handle bright light, terrible insomnia, nausea, muscle ache, exercise tolerance shot to pieces. I was actually a personal trainer back then as well, which was even more ironic. So I recovered from that and did a couple more marathons, and then had a few years where, looking back at my lifestyle was different then. I was doing lots of heavy marathon training and then living quite a hedonistic social life. So I was burning the candle at both ends. And then basically was kind of okay. And then in 2015, in my final year at university here at Northumbria, culmination of things, had a winter bug, ran a cross-country race when as soon as I finished the race, I was like, probably shouldn't have done that. And then I think just the stress from work, from dissertation, I just bombed into a kind of what was then ultimately, when I got back to London, because I was in Newcastle, because I then got a job at UCH in London, I moved down there, was then diagnosed with kind of chronic fatigue, although there'd been indications that was what was, I had this kind of, I suppose I'd get these kind of 2 to 3 weeks of fatigue related symptoms after the post-viral fatigue. And then, but like I said, from 2015, that was when I really dipped, and I couldn't exercise for 3 years. I had all manner of debilitating symptoms. I mean, like I said, I was diagnosed with a form of chronic fatigue. I know there are people with symptoms who've had it for years, who've been far more debilitated, bed bound, and obviously my heart goes out to those people. And I can only talk about my situation. So I was able to hold down the job. I don't know how at times. I mean, I was a band 5 at UCH. Work was great. It never affected my ability to work and produce. You know, I wasn't like suffering in terms of the standard of work, but it made work hard because I was knackered.
Yeah.
I had terrible brain fog. I mean, I wrote down some of the symptoms from 2015, you know, terrible insomnia, sensitivity to sound, terrible brain fog, susceptibility to the cold, occasionally pins and needles in the left hand, terrible mood swings, spaced out, problems with concentration. And then also I used to get, so the difference with fatigue, with chronic fatigue and COVID is that when I had chronic fatigue, yes, there were times where I was completely knackered and couldn't do anything, would have to lie down. But I was able to go for like short walks and kind of move along the street, as it were. Whereas with COVID, the fatigue was a much heavier kind of COVID. The fatigue was heavier in the sense that I was physically able to do much less. Right. The problem with chronic fatigue is that chronic fatigue was much more entrenched in terms of like nausea, muscle ache, and actually I would get much more delayed fatigue. So I remember trying a couple of times to go for a jog, and I jogged for like 10, 15 minutes, and I would feel terrible for days, for about 4 or 5 days, where you then get back to where you were. And so, yeah, I went through a whole process of trying to recover from chronic fatigue, trying different methods. I went down, I was engaged with the NHS, and I tried graded exercise therapy, where the principle was that you do the same amount each day. And I was kind of like, well, I know on certain days I'm going to feel terrible. And if I do the same amount as I did yesterday, I'm going to feel worse. So, you know, but like, you know, I was doing yoga, and I was kind of trying to do short walks. So this is like 2015, 2016. I went to see a doctor of ecological medicine in kind of Harley Street, which was very much a focus on like supplements, diet. And it was kind of like the diet that I was following, or was told to follow, was almost more stressful, because I was like, well, I can't have this, I can't have that. And it was almost like adding to the stress. I was like, oh, you know. And anyway, it was actually a friend of a friend said, oh, my friend has had something, I think, called chronic fatigue, and has been to see this guy and had some treatment. So put me in touch, and she gave me a rundown of the basic principles behind it. But I think I was very much still biomedical. I'm short in this vitamin, I need to take this, and, you know, for a fix. But eventually got around to reading the report, the kind of free report on this guy's website. And it was all to do with basically the link between stress and fatigue. Well, you know, that's in short. And so kind of a light bulb had gone off, because I was looking at pictures of myself fell running or doing marathons and thinking, well, so why could I do that then, and why can't I now? Like, it doesn't add up. I don't think my diet's terrible. Like, yeah, I mean, like anyone would have a beer. I don't think, you know, I was thinking, well, what's made me sick? And eventually, having read this report, this kind of free report, which highlights the influence of parasympathetic nervous system on recovery, and sympathetic nervous system on basically feeling knackered, and a link to kind of poor immune system, sleep, digestion, and crucially energy storage and production. That's when the light bulb moment happened. So I was like, right, okay, I think I'm onto something. But this is over a course of like a few years, like trying this and trying that. So you know, I had some treatment sessions with this guy called Simon Pimenta. And again, obviously, this relates to some of the things I've used to recover from COVID. And had some training sessions with him. He had suffered from chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia for about 9 years, and recovered. So it's very much like, you read this report, and I think there's actually now a video. It's mecfxexplored.com, and it's not like a hard sell. People just have a look at it, and for some people that will relate to their situation. For other people it won't, because there's obviously different variables that cause fatigue. And for some people, you know, changing a diet is fine. So, but for me, it definitely resonated. I was like, well, I know I've been stressed. I mean, like I said, I'm doing physical stress with, you know, lots of running, lots of high mileage running, 60, 70 miles a week at times. And then I kind of dip into this hedonistic lifestyle in Clubland. So I think I was kind of just pulling the body. So actually it kind of made sense. And so the idea of basically being in a stress state and having less energy, I was like, right, okay, I'm on something. And then, yeah, so I had some sessions with him, and it was hard work, and I had to kind of change the way I thought about things. and apply that together with some kind of graded exercise and kind of, but I started to notice a big difference over the course of a few months. So
that's really interesting to hear. And I think, you know, you've referenced kind of MECFS being a very broad umbrella term.
Exactly.
And huge diversity in people's presentations. And I think to echo that, your experiences of both the MECFS in the past and long COVID has had some varieties and some differences, and possibly because there've been different viruses that have led to your symptom pattern. And I think if we look at MECFS, it's a really broad umbrella term that covers many people with symptoms that could be caused by many different reasons.
Exactly.
And I suppose it's quite interesting to hear your personal experience of having had glandular fever and this time coronavirus, and how the long-term consequences of that has had some differences in your personal experience. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no, and I think look, there's going to be people out there who get chronic fatigue ME who have who will report no previous life stress and so, because so everybody's situation is unique to them. So like I said, I can only talk about my situation. I've certainly never been dogmatic in saying the way to recover is this, because there's so many the influences and variables that cause a condition like that will vary from person to person. So for some people, changing diet or there'll be certain ways they recover. For me, it was identifying a link between various stresses in life. I mean, for example, when I couldn't exercise, realized how much I was probably relying on exercise to unwind and relax. So actually, when I couldn't, I was like, oh my God, so actually that taught me to learn ways, meditation, yoga, to switch the mind off. So, actually it was a bit of a kind of wake up call in that sense. But as you say, there are so many different causes for people's symptoms, and therefore recovery will always be different. And so the things that I talk about that helped me to recover from chronic fatigue, and then also COVID, long COVID, whatever you want to call it, because I think someone commented on my tweet and said, I'm not sure whether that was long COVID. And I was like, I don't really know. Like, it was 4 to 5 months. I was off for 8 weeks. I've had a peripheral neuropathy. It wasn't very pleasant. If that's COVID or long COVID, I don't know. But ultimately, yeah, some of the methods I've used which relate to relaxation helped for chronic fatigue, and therefore have definitely helped to recover from COVID.
And that's a really important message, I think, because we know that in the context of both MECFS and long COVID, whether they're the same or different, is yet to be identified, is that exertion is something that can set people back. That exertion can be of different levels and different types, whether it be physical, mental, or cognitive, depending on the level of disability that people are experiencing. And I know that in our group, Long COVID physios tend to be quite active people by the nature of their jobs. And one of the things that's come out as a bit of a theme is that some people do really, really rely on exercise as a strategy to manage their health and well-being. And as a physio, then needing to stop, rest, and pace is really difficult to navigate. How have you found that in terms of like your personal and professional identity, learning to take back the exercise and adopt those new strategies in terms of managing stress, as you mentioned?
Well, I went through all the different stages of kind of anger, frustration, because I went from running with a running club, which obviously is the whole social participation. I went from running 4, 5, 6 times a week to not being able to run at all for kind of 10 minutes or more. So that was a big impact. And it was almost like my kind of identity had been taken away, because I tried to kind of get involved, like go to the pub and meet runners, but it's not great if you're sitting talking to people listening about running when you can't really do it yourself. And that really affected me quite severely for a while. So I went through lots of kind of, I guess, like an acceptance phase, where I'd like, for a while I'd see people out running and I'd be like, and I was constantly analyzing like, how long would it take me to go back, and kind of, so, but ultimately, I suppose, came to acceptance. I was like, right, well, okay, what do I need to get back to doing that? And obviously some of the training I had with this guy, Simon, helped with that. And I think really working on relaxation and learning to switch off, and knowing that by doing that, I was recovering better, fed into doing more. And actually not over analyzing everything. So for example, I would think that, you know, I'd go for a walk and I'd be thinking, oh, you know, how far can I walk? Or is this going to have repercussions tomorrow? And I was doing that. So even when I was walking, I was constantly creating kind of stress with kind of unhelpful thoughts, as opposed to just going, I'm going to go for a 10-minute walk and just kind of enjoy it and look around. Because I was constantly thinking about negative aspects, like, oh, am I going to feel, you know, and that's normal to a point, but actually it's not very useful if you're doing it all the time. So I try to kind of live in the moment and try and just enjoy, like, appreciate simple things. And you know, I'd also just try and think, okay, well, I feel quite good today. I'll think, okay, well, if I can walk for, I think I could probably walk for, you know, 40 minutes. I'll walk for 25 minutes, just so you're not quite doing that, you know, going into that. And a lot of this is trial and error, because obviously you have to kind of find out what you can and can't do. But I think so. I basically put the kind of exercise principles in terms of trying not to do too much, and also, like,
so it sounds like pacing then, is that right?
Yeah, pacing, but like on days where I felt crap, I obviously just didn't do anything, because I tried that kind of daily thing before. And so basically putting together pacing strategies with relaxation strategies in terms of, you know, switching the mind off, meditation, yoga, mindfulness, visualization, cutting out looking at screens all the time. Like, you know, that's something I'm still learning now, because I look at a screen all day at work, and sometimes you know, you get into the habit of coming home and looking at a screen and going like this on the iPad.
Oh, doom scrolling, not good for anyone.
No, it's not. It's not. And so I think even now I'm learning how to be more, to relax more in the evening. Like, I wrote down a whole list of things recently. You know, podcasts, listen to music, read, meditate, yoga. You know, stop. You know, because we know that looking at screens uses energy and ties you out.
Exertion, isn't it? And
exactly. Especially if you've been looking at a screen all day at work. So I think look, it's twofold. It was basically learning to kind of switch off the mind, or being more relaxed in your approach to things, not being so hard on yourself all the time. Oh God, you know, I've overdone it again. Thinking, look, you know, like, okay, well, I'm trying hard. I'm, you know, just taking more of a relaxed approach, enjoying trying to focus on what you can do, which is pretty hard to do at times if you're feeling pretty terrible. So, you know, and not worrying so much about, I went through ages of comparing myself to what I used to be able to do, which obviously breeds negativity, because you think, oh God, I used to be able to run for an hour or 2 hours or whatever and do all these things, and now I can't do them, which is the normal response. But ultimately, if that festers, then it breeds negativity and negative internal dialogue. And so I think it was basically trying to appreciate what I could do, trying to take a more relaxed approach when I did exercise, and then also learning to actually switch off and, you know, and actually just relax in the evenings. And when I started to do all of those, my energy it was almost like, it wasn't like, you know, overnight. I didn't wake up one morning and go, right, I'm going to go off and run for days. It was over a course of kind of weeks and months. I was like, right, my brain fog went. And I was like, okay, I was getting no brain fog at work. And I was like, and then I started to have more energy. And then from there, I started to think, right, well, I'm going to start doing some walk jogging. So I started to do some kind of walk jogging, and, you know, just start off just very gently. And I built it up to there. And basically so I went to see this guy in probably April 2017. And so I moved down to London in 2015. So about 2.5 years after being down in London. And then by June, probably midsummer, end of the summer, I was back running again.
Well,
on some level. You know,
and I'm so pleased that you've had that experience in the past, and that you've been able to identify the different types of activities that are exertion, and how maybe separating them, so you're not doing the physical and the cognitive and the emotional at the same time, kind of dampens down that level of exertion that's combined, that can then limit your post-exertional symptoms or malaise. And what I find really interesting is how that experience for you in the past has supported you through this experience now. And I think it's a really valuable lesson, where I know personally, as someone now living with long COVID, I've been very grateful to the lessons that have been passed on to us by other communities of people living with chronic health
Yeah,
conditions, to learn those lessons when I haven't had those personal experiences before. And so for me, it's been, learning to rest, learning to pace,
yeah,
learning that exercise wasn't helping me, it was setting me back. And I know that I've been very grateful for those lessons from particular communities like the MECFS community. And it
yeah.
sounds like you yourself have been able to implement those lessons you've learned that was successful for you in this example with living with another health condition, long COVID. So it's great to hear you've had those experiences and they've been successful for you. And that's amazing.
Yeah, and also, again, going back to what I was saying before, chronic fatigue is different variables. Obviously, COVID, people are affected by different symptoms as well. And so, some of the things that I'll probably mention in a second that have helped me might not help the next person. So because there may be more underlying, because we know that COVID affects people in so many different ways.
It does, yeah.
But we know that trying, if you put the body in a relaxed state as much as you can, and look, this is easy to say. I live on my own. I mean, I was done in with COVID. I couldn't do a huge amount, but I didn't have kids to look after. So I appreciate, there are so many different situations where actually you can say, well, actually this is really useful, but it's much harder in practice to put that, or it's harder to put that into practice because you have less time. If you've got to put kids to bed and look after them, then it's obviously, and I really feel for those people, because it's hard enough trying to look after yourself if you're completely knackered and can barely do the washing up or get a pint of milk from the shop, to actually try and work and or look after children and stuff, So
Absolutely. Well, Rob, I wondered if you would have a key message that maybe you would like to share with people that are listening to this podcast, about what you've learned through this journey.
I think don't be too hard on yourself. Recovery isn't always linear. You're going to have ups and downs. Try and relax as much as you can. Mindful. You might realize, actually, by doing some little bits of snippets of meditation, yoga, that actually you realize how stressed you are, because it's natural to worry about symptoms all the time, but ultimately it might be worth, writing things down. You can acknowledge things, but it means by writing them down, you're not ruminating on them all the time. And therefore that will promote a more pragmatic, realistic recovery, and then ultimately put you in more of a relaxed state, which certainly in my experience helped me recover. So, that kind of mindfulness, and, like I said, we're not robots. It's hard to recover from things like this, but give yourself a chance, and, give yourself a pat on the back for small achievements. Everything, Rome wasn't built in a day. And, things like, thinking of what's a long-term, classic thing for people overdoing things is a kind of short-term, long-term goal thing. So basically, if your aim is to do X, but you think about the here and now, and you get too excited doing something because you're over enthusiastic or you're frustrated, and you do too much, you're probably going to have a little bit of a dip or a setback. So actually think about, right, well, I want to be able to it might be walking to the local park and back. How do I get there? And it might be that you do several shorter sessions before you do that. So you think about the long-term goal. And I think one of the things that really, really bred negativity for me was this kind of can and can't. So, I would say, I can't run anymore. Well, actually, if you say, well, I can't run at the moment, but I know I'd like to get back to doing it, or I can't run as much as I can at the moment, or at the moment I can't walk as far as I want to. Well, you'll probably get back to it, but I think if you make very kind of black or white, either or statements, that promotes a negative response, and therefore that might cause you to feel more down about things. So kind of give yourself a chance, pace yourself, and give yourself time. But I think the main thing for me is try and utilize, our kind of natural healing system as much as we can, which is the parasympathetic nervous system, which I basically didn't use at all. I was in a constantly stressed state. So for me, that has helped recover from chronic fatigue and also COVID. And it might help other people if they simple stretches, switching the mind off, relaxing, Not always possible. And again, if you're feeling run down and ill and stressed and anxious, it's easier said than done. Just to kind of, it's not like we're going to pretend everything's okay, but just taking time to kind of switch off, relax, and promote like a kind of more rational, more pragmatism, and feeling more of a kind of calmer outlook, because I know from my experience that helped me recover and increased my energy levels.
Well, Rob, that's a really positive message around being kind to ourselves. And
yeah, I think that's, you probably put it better than me. That's
and also like to manage within our abilities and our current symptoms. So I want to say thank you so much for sharing your stories with and sharing. So thank you ever so much.
No problem. Good chatting.